and welcome to Mayor Keller's Metro Crime Initiative. I'm Alicia Manzano, and I'll be helping us move through our agenda today as we hear from a wonderful panel of experts. In the wake of violent weeks here in our city, we are convening the fourth session of the Mayor's Metro Crime Initiative to develop strategies for shutting the revolving door. We have key stakeholders joining us today to discuss increased community safety through adequate sentencing, resources for victims, and offender reentry services to mitigate threats. Before we hear from our speakers and panelists, I'd like to acknowledge some of the folks who have joined us today. We have Representative Gail Chasey, Representative Meredith Dixon, Representative Mo Maestas, Representative Pamela Herndon, Representative Day Hockman Vigil, Representative Joy Garrett, Representative Debbie Sariñana, Senator Daniel Ivy Soto, Senator Harold Pope, City Council President Cynthia Borrego, City Councilor Brooke Basan, City Councilor Clarissa Peña, County Commissioner Adrienne Barboa, Ben Bauer, Chief Public Defender, Roberta Baca from OSI, Assistant Superintendent Gabriella Blakey from Albuquerque Public Schools. So before we get started with the panelists, I'd like to introduce Mayor Tim Keller.
Well, thank you so much, Alicia. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for session 4 of the Metro Crime Initiative. And for us, we know what our community needs now is leadership from every level when it comes to what we can do better with respect to our criminal justice system. And this really is our opportunity to provide that leadership. We have the chance here to make some big lifts, to put our differences aside, and to really come together to achieve some concrete changes that all of us have been pursuing. The difference is maybe now we can do this together, and we can also do it in the short term to help our community stay safer. Now, it's not lost on anyone who's participating today what our city has been through in the last few weeks, not to mention the last few years. But as we're grappling with the homicides and the gun violence that have touched so many of our roles, it's absolutely frustrating for all of us. And I know we feel this in different ways, but that collective frustration, I think, is clear and remains to be front and center, especially with some of the situations that we've seen over the last few weeks. And when we think about that concept, unfortunately, it's this notion of the revolving door, which I know is obviously just sort of a phrase that means a whole lot of different things. But I think it's important to understand the two-way nature of that, right? Our job as being parts of the criminal justice system is for people who are violent and represent a threat to the community. That revolving door needs to keep them away from harming the public. And the other end is also true. For people who are coming out of that door and are not, who are ready for alternatives and productive lives going forward, that door needs to be open for them to come out. And that is really what this is all about, is addressing both sides of that equation. Now, I do want to highlight some examples of how this problem is just continuing to be front and center. We obviously saw what happened with our 4 officers who were almost killed by a fugitive from California who had fled a halfway house, who again almost took the lives of 4 of our officers. And we're grateful that they're recovering, and for all the people who helped jump into that situation, some of the heroes that we mentioned yesterday, but also for what they did, because they saved dozens of lives of civilians who were there at that coffee shop. But again, the situation should not happen. The system collectively, and obviously this is an example of a system in another state, but the system collectively should not put ourselves in that situation in the first place. And just one day later, our detectives were trying to bring in a homicide suspect on parole who had fled with an assault-style rifle and then attempted to carjack an innocent bystander. And here we see this intersection with why was that person, why were we not notified about the parole violations? Why was there a weapon? Again, also with what happened at Washington Middle School with an access to firearms. These are all the challenges that we're facing, but they're all the challenges that ripple throughout our community, throughout every aspect of the criminal justice system. We also know that we've got to have proven resources that we know exist in our community, but we have to have more of them for folks who are re-entering society. And we're going to talk about that to disrupt this cycle of violence. And so as we address these big problems and try and have some common ground as we go forward, I believe we've got to come out of this. We owe it to each other. We owe it to our community to come out of this with a roadmap for everything from crime legislation, whether it's a special session or otherwise, to things individually that our own offices can do better, so that instead of disagreeing with each other or blaming challenges in the system, we're saying, here's what we are going to do differently and better. And here's also how I am going to help, or how you're going to help the organization next to you in that criminal justice system to do this better. That's what this is about, to make our community safer for everyone who lives here. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to someone who I know believes passionately in this and is joining us today personally, our Attorney General, Hector Balderas.
Now, Mayor, I don't think that Hector has joined us quite yet. Oh, and Kelly. Let's unmute Anne here.
Sorry.
There you go.
There we go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mayor Keller. And yeah, my apologies. Can everyone hear me? I'm off mute, right? Okay. My apologies. I just got a text from the Attorney General. He's having some technology difficulties and he had some travel issues. So I am here on his behalf. Again, his very sincere apologies, because of course he is very interested in this project, knows what a very important project it is. So I will just be making a few remarks on his behalf. Also, we have Jennifer Savadra here today, and she is our director of our advocacy and intervention group at the Attorney General's office. And she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in dealing with community members. Her staff every day talks to members of the community, gives them resources, tells them the right places they need to go. And also she has crime victim advocates in that division who do just fantastic work in helping crime victims, helping them navigate, I think, the sometimes rather, torturous process of figuring out what the resources are, getting them hooked up with CVRC and the other wonderful organizations that do that work that is just so very important to crime victims. So she is also here to help. And so just on behalf of the Attorney General, then I would just like to note that, of course, resources for victim families and for offenders seeking reentry to our communities, since we're really looking at both things today, really must be two of the top priorities we make as we address the impacts of crime. It really is paramount that the justice system not impose further trauma on these groups, whether they've been directly impacted by crime or whether they are attempting to successfully reintegrate into society. And I think all too often our systems do create additional traumas and barriers, not necessarily on purpose. It's just sometimes the way the system works, everything from burdensome administrative processes or lack of communication that can cause victims to really lose hope that justice will be served, that their voices will be heard. And sometimes processes really trip up offenders who are genuinely trying to comply with the terms of their reentry. And just sometimes the processes are too unwieldy to really be used effectively. As lawmakers look at criminal justice reform, I think that this is a very important point, that they have to ensure that there are adequate resources made available to these victims and to people coming out of incarceration, so that they can make that successful reintegration into our society. And too often in our office, and I know other offices represented by people here on this call, we see that victims are not consulted on changes to the system that will have a very huge impact on their lives, not only their cases, but their lives. And of course, we see the prioritization of releasing non-violent offenders, which is, obviously a very worthy goal. But then it seems that then there's no network for them, no social support, no safety net once they are released, coming into our communities. So the legislature, we hope, will make meaningful investments in direct services to all of those communities, so that we can be sure that those who have suffered from crime are supported by the resources that we have and any resources that can be forthcoming, as well as those that are re-entering into our communities. At our office, at the Attorney General's office, we have, as I mentioned before, a dedicated unit of victim advocates whose sole focus is to assist those who have been impacted by crime, particularly violent crime, particularly crimes of sexual violence against both adults and children. And we work with a lot of partner organizations who provide those support services, but we believe they really are historically underfunded, and that also must change. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Deputy Attorney General and Kelly, for joining us. We appreciate your thoughts, and please send our regards to Attorney General Hector Balderas as well. I also want to acknowledge that Representative Marian Matthews, Representative Natalie Figueroa have joined us, so thank you for joining us as well. Now I'd like to get into our agenda for the day. As you know, we are meeting again virtually, so I appreciate you doing this. We wanted to keep the momentum going, as I mentioned the last session, but we also want to maintain safety of all with all of these COVID cases sort of going up throughout our community. So I want to make sure that we keep the conversation going. It's critical. We're at a critical juncture in our city and in our state to get some of these things done. So we have a great panel joining us today as well. We're going to have a great breakout discussion, which I want to get to, of course. And the one thing I want to mention as we think through all of this and as we get into the breakout discussion as well, we need smart, measurable, realistic goals that we can get to today. So when we're discussing solutions around some of these issues, I really want to be very specific, and you'll see me trying to guide the conversation in that direction, both with the panelists, and then you'll have facilitators who join us as well in your breakout groups to get to very specific solutions as we grapple with tackling violent crime in our city. So for the agenda, if we go to the next slide, obviously we've done welcome introductions. We're going to go into our case study presentation. We're going to have a video for you, which is the fourth sort of component of Kelly's story. And then we're going to get into our breakout session to discuss all of the things that we heard from our panelists, prioritize solutions, and like I said, get very specific, and then we'll close. We know it's a Friday afternoon. We'll get you out of here in time, but we want to make sure that we get to all of the content as well. So it's my now distinct pleasure to introduce our panel who have joined us today, and we're very grateful that they're willing to share their expertise with us. So first we have Chief Judge Stan Whitaker. Next we have Deputy Commander Kyle Hartsock. Then we have Angel Garcia from the Violence Intervention Program. We have Corey Lee from Crossroads. Jeff Holland from Endorphin Power, and Mary Ellen Garcia from Crime Victims Reparation Commission. Thank you so much for joining us, our entire panel of guests today. So to kick us off, I would love to hand it off to Chief Judge. Actually, I'm sorry. Before we go to the panel, I want to make sure that we get to our case study video. So let's see what is happening in this section of Kelly's story.
In the fourth session, Kelly's criminal record has become extensive. To support a serious drug habit, Kelly sells small amounts of meth and heroin. One day, Kelly tries to sell drugs to a group of individuals. During this drug sale, one of the individuals tries to rob Kelly of the drugs and money. In response, Kelly pulls out a handgun and shoots at the person. An innocent bystander is killed, and Kelly is charged with the homicide. The focus of this session will be sentencing, post-release programs, and the cycle of repeat offenses.
All right, so Kelly's story continues to evolve, as we know, keeping in mind where we are at within Kelly's story. I'd love to hear from you, Judge Whitaker, and what you think the courts could be doing with folks like Kelly. I think you're muted, Judge Whitaker.
There it goes. Okay. Technology. Thank you. And I'm sorry that it took me so long to get on. Before I start into the fact pattern, I mean, I think it goes without saying, Mayor Keller touched on it. I think it has to be said again and again and again, you know, that the four officers involved in the shooting last week, you know, are truly heroes in this community. And I think the folks that were stepping in, the citizens helping as well, gives you hope in this community. Here we are grappling with incredible crime and difficulties and challenges of late, and then you see, you know, acts by our law enforcement and then citizens to stepping in and helping in really dire circumstances. And it just makes me proud to be a member of this community. So with that being said, I'm not exactly sure how to proceed except looking at the fact pattern. I think one of the things I think that sort of stands out to me is what could have been done with this individual before he got to the point where we're now talking about homicide charges and getting deeper into the criminal justice system, understanding that part of what was going on, he was, I think as the fact pattern sort of started out, there were some petty crimes that he was involved in, and it has just sort of escalated as time has gone by up to this point where he's now accused of using a firearm in a drug deal and killing an innocent bystander. There's nothing more tragic than those circumstances, and unfortunately, we see the reality of that in our community way too often. But I think one of the things that as a court, one of the things that we do is we are in a reactive mode. I mean, what happens is that these things happen in the community, and then it comes to the court for us to then figure out how we are to address it, understanding the overlay of the Constitution, the rule of law, and how all of that applies in addressing these issues in the criminal justice system. And so that has to be the standpoint, the stance that we as a court take to look at anything that comes before us. But one of the things that I in looking at this fact pattern again is what could have been done before. And one of the things that I think is really I think overlooked a little bit in this community and probably in others are the various programs that we have in place. There are challenges in the criminal justice system. We all know there's things that we can improve upon. I think Mayor Keller indicated that collaboration is really the key. I couldn't emphasize that more. Collaborating is the best way to try to address resolving these problems, not finger pointing, not passing off responsibility for whatever we can control and to deal with, but collaborating with one another to try to resolve these problems. One of the ways that I think we've got some collaboration, which maybe could have helped Kelly in this situation, is to look at some of the therapeutic courts, the specialty courts that are available in Bernalillo County and in the Second Judicial District Court. I mean, I'll name them. I mean, we've got an adult drug court, we've got a juvenile drug court in our juvenile center, we've got a mental health court, because we all know that there are some significant mental health issues with many of the offenders in our community. We have a young adult court where we're trying to target that young population, 18 to 25. And my wife says that, as an educator, the young people haven't really had their brains fully formed until they're probably 26. So our young adult court is trying to address young offenders from 18 to 25 and try to intervene and try to catch them early on. It's a great program and incredibly successful. We've got a DWI court that looks at felony DWI folks to try to provide some assistance with them as well. And then we're trying to put together, again, a veterans court that we had going years ago. And I mention those because all of those programs are proven successful in helping address early on, when we get people in the system, before they get to the real violent crime, the rape, and the real violence against individuals in the community, to try to get into these therapeutic programs, some of which last 12 months, up to 2 years, and some beyond that, getting people in these therapeutic programs where they have consistent contact with a judge presiding over it, case managers, peer mentors, and keeping track of their compliance with either therapy, counseling, medication, depending upon what the circumstances are. And what we have found, at least in this court, the people that we get into these programs that qualify and successfully get through them, the recidivism rates are incredibly low. Our drug court recidivism rate is 5%, if not less than that. Our mental health court is probably 7% or a little bit less than that. Our young adult court is probably 1%. the people that get in the program and go through it successfully. Our DWI court is 1% as well. And I could go on and on about these programs. And so when we talk about, what can we do? There's a lot we can do, but we also need to pour resources into those kinds of programs that are available to try to get the folks early on that find themselves involved in the criminal justice system to start addressing these issues early on. If we can get them into these kinds of programs, so we can expand these with the money that's necessary to get these programs up and running and expanded. They're proven successful. We have really low recidivism rates, and we're incredibly proud of those things here at the Second Judicial District Court. And it involves, and it has involved, the collaboration of all the justice partners, from the public defender's office to the DA's office to the AG's office, law enforcement, the courts. They are proven successful. So my comments are, if we can try to identify these folks early on before they get to the point where Kelly is now, we have a real opportunity for some success in addressing crime in this community. That's just one avenue. That's not the answer to all of it, but that's one way that I think in this community that we can start addressing the crime that we're seeing escalating over time with particularly some of these young offenders. All right, I'll stop talking now. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for sharing your insights, Judge Whitaker. And I know you mentioned increased resources for specialty courts. Now, do you think that also includes more resources for caseworkers, for creating a pipeline for folks to go into that line of work? I know our next session, we're going to be talking a little bit about that. Do you feel like that is also a need, or are you talking just resources, monetary resources to expand those specialty courts?
There it is. All right. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. I think all of it. We need money to throw into these programs in a myriad of ways, and I don't want to go into all the details. But it involves money. It involves people. It involves volunteers. I mean, one of the beautiful things about our Veterans Court, just as an example, that we had going, and we're getting ready to start up again here in a few months, is that we had volunteers, volunteer veterans that would come back and help with some of the veterans that are in the program to sort of help them through it and get to the other side of it. But having those volunteers involves finding them and getting them involved in the program, as well as some financial cost of having them participate in the program with the offenders that are participating in it. So I think it involves all of that in terms of need.
Thank you so much for sharing that and clarifying that. Our next panelist, just to keep us moving, as you know, I want to get to some specific measurable goals. Judge Whitaker just shared expansion in specialty courts, more funding poured into them, more volunteers needed, et cetera. We'll go into these ideas into our breakout sessions to make sure that we are putting our best thinking forward. So I also want to acknowledge that Judge Joshua Sanchez joined us. Thank you for joining us, Judge. Next, I'd like to welcome Deputy Commander Kyle Hartsock from the Albuquerque Police Department.
Hi, guys. I appreciate you having me on. I'll try to keep this about 7 minutes if my timing's right. And good to see Judge Whitaker on just before me, the two bald guys right in the beginning. I think that's a good start. The first thing I want to talk about is the voice of the victim. I'm what I call myself really a victim-centered detective for years and years and years. And as I now lead and help build investigations, I'd like to stick to what's the best outcome for the victim. But in all my years of investigating, there was always a question I was never asking until a few years ago. And that was asking the survivor of a sexual assault by a stranger, how did this crime affect you after? It sounds like an easy question, but it's something that most police officers don't ask. It's something that in my experience, a lot of courts don't ask, or that legislative hearings don't ask. What she told me is that after the incident, she could no longer strap her young child into a car seat in the back seat without fear of being attacked from behind. She talked about sleeping with a garden tool under her pillow, about not even allowing family members to leave her front door unlocked during Thanksgiving dinners, of how incredibly traumatizing this thing was. I think police officers and everyone in the system can be a lot better about capturing these victims' words at almost every stage of the process to check in with them and make sure they understand what did this crime mean to them. We also got to talk about victim wraparound services. When I was working human trafficking cases, I would go to meetings where we'd have as many as 27 representatives of organizations that all want to help human trafficking victims. I can tell you the last thing one of those victims wants is 27 referrals. They don't want to talk to 27 different organizations or contacts. We need to try to make systems that give them the fewest amount of guides through these systems as possible. That will make it the easiest on the victim. The organizations have to learn how to work together at the benefit of the victim, not the benefit of the organization. Allface, which conducts safe house interviews here in Albuquerque, who does a great job at what they do, they are a good model of someone who is trying to provide wraparound services. They don't just do the forensic interviews, there's counseling, they can help work with housing, but they still suffer from a shortened budget that doesn't allow them to fully fund these measures and a lack of partners that have enough staffing and their own funding to be good permanent partners in this process. In this example of helping children through traumatic events become survivors in a positive way. I want to move on to, I missed the last meeting 2 weeks ago because I was at Washington Middle School helping run a critical incident of a 13-year-old who murdered another 13-year-old. And amongst the many lessons that we can learn from that, one has to be, as a state, we need to create legislation that requires guns to be secured and locked up, especially around certain populations and vulnerable people. In this instance, it appears this child got a gun so easy that the parents didn't even notice, brought it to school and committed a murder. Several states have laws that already exist that restrict or put a liability sanctions to any kind of adult who allows a vulnerable person to retrieve a firearm. We need to take a serious look at that because the smallest of steps in this instance would have not caused a 13-year-old to lose their life, most likely, not to cause an insane amount of trauma to all the other children that are at school today, to the APS police officer, to my detectives who had to investigate. Something as simple as locking that gun up probably could have prevented this whole incident. The next one I want to talk about, and we've already mentioned it twice now, but the 4 officers that were injured last week, 3 of them who took bullets into their bodies. One of the unique things about our offender in that case is he was using a firearm with a high capacity magazine. This was the magazine that sticks out of the bottom of a handgun. What this does is this allowed him to have a continuous firefight with no pause in the action and didn't have to wait to reload, as the officers did have to reload. The officers were at a disadvantage because they were out, ammunitioned essentially by this person with a high capacity magazine. Now, in most self-defense or sportsman uses of firearms, we just don't need more than 10 rounds. The common thought is most magazines should be kept at 10 rounds or less in almost every case. If that would have happened last week, there's a good chance we don't have 4 officers injured by one individual in an outdoor public setting. We're all very lucky that more won't hurt. So some common sense laws to reduce the amount of ammunition a firearm can carry at any one time. I want to move on now to pre-trial, presumption of dangerousness and detainment. And I've sat through these hearings. I've watched these hearings in court. On people I've arrested, people on cases I've supervised. Court not only has to find is someone dangerous, but they have to find is there a rule that can prevent this person from another violation. Well, I can tell you right now, most studies nationwide will say if a gun is present in a domestic violence situation, just at all, if the offender has access to a gun, the victim is 5 times more likely to die from that gun. With that same thinking in line, if an offender has immediate access to a gun, like they are armed at the time they commit even a property crime or a violent crime, they are just way more high risk. Now, the court does have ways to test for drug and alcohol addictions if that's what the person was going through, and that might be a major factor in why they committed a crime. So they can release them and drug test them. If the person needs to be prohibited from going to certain areas where a victim might be, or we want to make sure they're at work or on house arrest, we can put a GPS monitor on them. But what I've seen time and time again, whether it's on social media or new crimes being committed by offenders who are on pretrial release, there's no real good measurable thing that a court can do, no tool that can stop them from possessing a gun again. And again, if they're already possessing it the first time, it is much too easy to get another gun and do the same crime again, or at least be in that really high risk category. We saw it with Devin Munford, who was accused of murder this spring, who was on pretrial release for using a firearm. He just got another gun and used it again, and someone lost their life. So to me, if you have a gun when you commit a crime, the presumption of dangerousness and the lack of any kind of rule that can prevent you from doing it again is too high. I think we all need to look at that, how that statute or the constitutional amendment's written, or how it's being used right now to take that into a heavier account. When it comes to pretrial services, they need to be monitored 24 hours, 7 days a week if a person is on GPS. If they're on GPS, the court's already determined this is the highest risk that the offender could be without me putting them in jail. We need to have a 24-hour support system every day of the year. It needs to be modeled, in my opinion, similar to what probation and parole does at the state level. They have a 24-hour response center. They monitor these things. They also give their probation officers, in some cases, the ability to issue warrants for their arrest without a judge's signature. Now, it's not in every case, but it's in some cases. I think it's something that should be considered here. We gave them the chance to get out. They've violated these conditions by cutting off an ankle monitor, for example. We need to be able to take immediate action. The last item I want to talk about is the Firearm Enhancement Statute that is in regards to sentencing. The current law says that if a gun is used during a felony crime, 1 year mandatory sentence in jail or prison has to be added to the crime and has to happen at the beginning of the sentence. This all makes sense. What I propose is just like DWI laws. There are certain DWI cases where they are not allowed by statute to be pled out of the case. I think we need to look at applying that same rationale to some of the firearm enhancement laws. I hope none of you in this meeting has ever had a gun pulled on you or been shot at or been shot. I guarantee if you have, your brain got rewired that day and it was terrifying. It has changed you. And I can also tell you from other statistics that if someone gets shot, they are much more likely to be an offender in a shooting sometime in the near future. Every time we allow a victim to get abused by a gun, not only are we creating a victim, we might be creating our new offender. And finally, while I appreciate Kelly's story as a hypothetical, there are two young ladies that I worked with as possible human trafficking victims years ago as juveniles that are both here in jail in Albuquerque on murder charges right now. These stories are real. These people actually exist, and I appreciate everyone's attempt to try to help find a solution to it. Thank you.
Thank you for such an important dialogue to start. Kyle, we need to continue to have this conversation, and I know there's a lot of work to be done at the state, as you mentioned as well, around gun laws and other avenues that we need to take to make sure that we're keeping our community safe. And unfortunately, we do have someone on our panel and on the screen who has been directly impacted by gun violence. And we're really lucky to also have him working here at the city of Albuquerque to utilize his own experience, his lived experience, his ability to connect with others. I can go on and on about Mr. Angel Garcia. Angel, if you'd like to share a few thoughts about Kelly's story and your connection to it as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on here. And if my voice cracks, it's because I'm a little bit nervous. But so the program I work for, it's in the name, Violence Intervention. And that's, so if I was to talk about the case study, there's nothing I could personally do for Kelly anymore because she's already incarcerated for the homicide. But what my program would focus on would be identifying the other individuals who were trying to rob Kelly so that we could reach out to them and start intervening in their lives and try to offer them a way out. Also, working with the victim of the dead bystander. If there's a specific ask that I would have today, it would be funding to build capacity. So my program has identified 220 individuals, and we've spoken to 161 of them. I have been on 154 of those custom notifications. So it's not a stop there. Once we identify these individuals, we go talk to them. There's follow-up that has to be done. There's referrals to services that has to be done. We've currently started a pilot program on August 9th with UNMH, which is a hospital-based violence intervention program, where I now get to go into the hospital and talk to these individuals impacted by violence. And if their families are there, I get to talk to their families as well. We are also in the infancy stages of bringing a trauma recovery center here to Albuquerque, a trauma recovery center, whereas the hospital-based violence intervention and the violence intervention program focus on individual victims. The trauma recovery center will allow us to focus on individual, family, and community trauma. Because, when someone gets shot, and like Alicia said, I have been shot before, and it sucks. And you're totally right, Kyle. Once you get shot, your brain does get rewired so that you don't get shot again, So, so intervening in that cycle, giving somebody a way out is crucial. So like I said, this trauma recovery center will tie in to focus more. So it'll be a physical space outside of the hospital, outside of the VIP building, where clinicians and credible messengers, such as myself, will be able to provide case management, individual and family trauma-informed care, trauma-informed therapy. Also provide non-traditional services and support, such as like healing circles for affinity groups. Violence intervention program, both hospital and regular VIP, our sole focus is gun violence. The Trauma Recovery Center will focus on all violence, except for interpersonal and domestic violence, because there's already a domestic violence resource center here in town. But also it would be like a central hub where we could, like Kyle said, we don't, the 30 people working with one person, it's overwhelming, especially for high-risk individuals who have never wanted services or have never accepted services before in their life, especially because they're not very trusting of government agencies or community-based organizations. So we it's kind of like approaching a skittish horse. You got to approach them like calmly, and just having one individual working with them, getting them all their needs would be crucial to their success. So funding to expand and build capacity for more outreach workers, because I'm one man and I've been doing this work for 1.5 years by myself now. And 161 people that I've had to work with, not all of them accept services, but a lot of them have. And our program, out of those 161 people that we've actually spoken to, only about 10 or 11 have gone back to jail, and not for violent crimes. They've gone back to jail for probation violations or drug offenses. So we're very happy about that. Also, this program is based on existing evidence on work that has been done nationally. Gun violence has plagued this country for decades, and there's been, and most importantly, it impacts low-income Black and Brown communities the most. So us being able to get in there and have one central hub to help people out, to address that family trauma, the community trauma as well, it'll be crucial. As far as reentry goes, I've spoken with our director of reentry, Morgan Jacob, and she has got me approved. I'm gonna start going into Santa Fe P&M Penitentiary of New Mexico, and I asked to specifically work with violent offenders that are about to get out and gang members that are about to get out, so that I can start providing resource workshops. But then also, once they get out, I need a team of people to help me follow up with these individuals, to make sure that they're staying focused, to make sure that they're getting their needs met. Because, I, for one, I could attest that if you're not given a direction before you get out of prison, you're going to go back down the road that and most of the time it's crime, selling drugs, picking up guns or whatever. So, and I've done 4 prison terms in California, and 3 out of the 4, that's what I did. The last prison term, I moved here, and I was fortunate enough to be able to change my life and be talking to you here. So if I could provide those resources for people and have a team that could help me follow up, that would be great. Also, that funding would be used to build capacity with community-based organizations, for us to, I said this in a meeting one time, it seems like here in Albuquerque, your emergency better happen between Monday through Friday, between 8 and 5 p.m., between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. If we were to get funding where we could have a emergency outreach response team overnight or something, have a RFP, some contracts to some community-based organizations that could hire people that could get called out to the hospitals at 2, 3 in the morning and talk to families, that could answer the phone. Hey, I had to leave my house because I was in a bad situation. Where could I go? Well, come here, and then we'll figure this out together. All of that stuff is crucial and very needed. And so yeah, if there's a specific ask, I would ask for funding for VIP so that Jerry could fund everything that we know that would help our community, And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Angel. So powerful to share your story and the impacts that you're already having in the community. Again, shout out to peer mentorship is what you're doing. And I think that needs to continue to happen. We heard about this in our last session as well. So we heard from you about, funding for VIP, a trauma recovery center. Those are great ideas. Next, I'd like to welcome Corey Lee from Crossroads. And I believe Corey has a couple of folks who will be joining her as well.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. I would like to introduce some of my friends that I brought along today to talk to you. I'd like to let them talk first. First will be Miss Holly, and then Miss Sheena, and then Veronica, and then I will see you at the end. So Miss Holly. Miss Holly, are you frozen? Might be frozen. So Miss Sheena, would you like to, or Miss Veronica, or sorry, Miss Sheena, would you like to go next?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sheena, and I've been in and out of jail and prison since 2016. I just got out of prison in June, and I'm currently recovering in the Crossroads Pavilions community. Reading Kelly's story reminded me a lot of my story, and there's 3 main things that I feel the metro area needs to work on and provide. And those 3 things are consistency, structure, and commitment on both ends. And when I say this, I mean this: when the city says that they're going to help by providing bus passes, hotel vouchers, and case management, then I feel they need to commit to those things, because I personally have been released from NDC to the Resource Center downtown at least 6 times, and never once were any of those resources available to me. And I also feel that NDC should work with the women's programs and have a set time window that they release the women, so that transportation can be provided to those women and the ones that truly want to change their lives around. And I just feel we have to all remember that addiction is a disease and that domestic violence isn't a choice. And if the state's going to offer a helping hand, that they should take the next step and grab it, and me having the opportunity of being in this Pavilions Crossroads program, like my whole life has been able to turn around. I had hit rock bottom. I had lost everything. And I have a job now. I'm rebuilding my relationship with my daughter, and I'm just doing great. And I feel like a program like this needs to be brought out to attention more to women who are trying to change their lives around.
Thank you so much, Sheena. Miss Veronica.
Hi, I'm Veronica, and I have been in and out of the system since 2007. And I feel like wraparound services would be beneficial. I mean, the program is great and everything, but like programs after like wraparound services would be really good. Like family therapy, childcare, housing, just like check-ins, you know, like just to make sure that everybody's still working the program and getting everything done correctly.
Thank you so much. So Ms. Holly, it looks like she lost her connection. So I just want to share with what she asked, and what her ask is create more diversion programs. And for us, that means creating more opportunities to people to access job skills training, to access mental health and substance abuse services before they're sentenced to long terms in prison. And really what we want to say is let's stop sending people to prison before they actually get there. So let's set them up for success by creating diversion programs. And then just to reiterate what Ms. Sheena said is let's provide additional funding to resources. If we know there's already a drain on the system for these resources, let's identify some more funding so that we don't run out. So that when we have women get released from MDC, hopefully not late at night, but that they have access to bus passes, that they have access to hotel vouchers, and housing and services, and funding for wraparound services. I think that's where Crossroads comes in. Crossroads has been providing services for 25 years. If you haven't heard of us, we provide services to women who are involved in the justice system, and we provide over 400 women a year with services. So let's turn to Kelly, because we need to figure out how Crossroads could support her. Crossroads most often interviews an applicant while they're incarcerated. 6 months before they leave incarceration, their case managers will support them in applying for our programs. Once they are accepted, and that's after a lengthy interview with our housing intake coordinator, we support them in identifying the goals that they want to work on, and we start working on them and get things ready so that when they come in, we can start from day one to support them in making progress in their lives. So the first thing we're going to ask Kelly is what does she think she needs? Because at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. It's about what she feels is important in her life in order to make progress. That could be family reunification, that could be vocational skills, that could be education, that could be mental health services, recovery services, legal. Maybe she's never been on probation before and she does not know how to navigate the probation system. And so, we're going to make sure that we work in all of those domains to support her. We're also going to help her identify the cultural connections that she feels are important for her to make progress in her life, whether that's a spiritual connection or whether that's a religious or a cultural connection. We really want to find out what motivates you, what makes you happy, what helps you thrive, what empowers you. And then we're also going to ask her to participate in recovery programming, and including UAs. We're going to ask her to participate in AA meetings and relapse prevention meetings. And then we're also going to provide her vocational skills, right? We're going to make sure that she has some basic computer skills so that she can go out into the workforce. That if she doesn't have a high school diploma, we're going to, sign her up with Catholic Charities. We're going to, get her signed up with CNM if she wants to go to college. And we're assuming that Kelly is a girl because we work with women. So I just wanted to preface that. We also are going to make sure that Kelly has family resources. Many of the women that we serve, our most popular age group is between 30 and 40, and many of the women that we serve have little ones, and they are navigating the CYFD system. They are also navigating co-parenting with guardians. So how can we support them in navigating all of that while trying to rebuild their foundations. And so Kelly's going to be doing all of that. And then Kelly's also going to be participating in therapeutic community activities, because we know women are relational, and we know isolation does not work well for us as women. And so we're going to help Kelly build a community and a healthy support system. And then transportation assistance, of course, medical, get her hooked up with Medicaid and all of that good stuff. And last but not least, we are going to make sure she has aftercare services and housing. We are going to, try to identify some housing resources, which is hard. If you are a nonprofit or you're working the system right now, you know that housing is very difficult. And so we are going to provide those aftercare services so she can come in anytime, whether she completes the program or not. It doesn't matter if she spent one day in the program. It doesn't matter if she spent 1 year in the program. What matters is she walked in through our doors and we said, welcome to our family. You're a part of our family and you're going to continue to be part of our family. So we're going to make sure that when she's in crisis, years after she leaves our programs, that there is somebody there to support her and get her connected to services. When we talk about gaps, what do we had a long conversation about this morning with our staff. And what they wanted me to tell you is that we need more mental health services. Give HCH some more funding. They are where our women go when they can't get their medication or when they get released without their medication. They are a godsend, because we know that first 24 to 72 hours is crucial. And if someone's mental health de-escalates because they don't have their medication, more than likely you're going to see them again. We need access to job training and easy access. Going into CNM is scary and it's hard to get signed up with an advisor. So let's make it easier to get some job training and some certification. And housing. And honestly, at this point, it does not have to be permanent. It just needs to be some housing. We know that housing is a premium right now. I'm hearing that apartments in the International District are running somewhere between $1,200 and $1,400 a month. Things that were going for HUD rates 6 months ago. Women can't afford that. They are going to fall through the cracks. They are going to become homeless again. So we need housing, and not just money for housing, but we actually need the 4 walls. So please, and we need an agreement between city and county to use the universal ROI so we can collaborate more effectively and coordinate services for our clients, whether it's with CYFD, with their lawyers, or with the Law Office of the Public Defender. We need to collaborate more effectively. And that means everybody's got to be in the room and everybody's got to come to the table, even if we don't like each other. So that is where what our staff wants you to know. And I hope that something resonated, and I hope you have an amazing weekend. Thank you so much for your time.
Nate, thank you, Corey, and thank you for taking the time to sit with your staff and with the folks that you work with to make sure that we're hearing about housing and transportation and more mental health services. And again, when we get into those breakout sessions, our wonderful facilitators are going to want you to quantify some of that. Do we need double the resources? Do we need, just so we can get to some measurable goals? I also really want to thank Veronica, Sheena, and Holly for sharing this space with us. You're incredible. We appreciate you coming into this space and sharing your story, and also for just telling us what you need. What does the city need to do, in the state and the county and everyone else, the judges, the court system? We appreciate you sharing your perspective. So with that, I'm going to hand it to our next panelist, because I really want to get us to our breakout sessions on time today. And it's Jeff Holland with Endorphin Power, whom I thought had pretty much the best headshot I'd ever seen submitted. It looked like you were eating maybe a powdered donut, Jeff. It was pretty amazing. I hope that you all remember it from the intro. So Jeff, take it away.
Thanks. That's a problem with going at or near the end of anything like this, is all the good stuff has usually been said and your thunder's kind of gone. But I appreciate everybody ahead of me, and I approach this from the standpoint of a couple different areas. And a little honesty here is the last time I stood in front of a judge facing criminal charges, it was the Honorable and late and what I consider to be great Judge James Blackmere, who, for me to paraphrase, said, "Mr. Holland, I feel like I'm at the end of my rope with you, and I don't want to sentence you to prison, but I'm afraid if I don't, you're going to die from your addiction. And quite frankly, everything he said was spot on. And, he sentenced me to prison, and I went to prison and got out and had another final, what I like to call grand slam run out there at the streets. And after that is when I got clean. And so I've kind of had that in my head when I was thinking about this. And so with Kelly, Kelly's going to go to prison if she's a habitual offender with a violent gun charge, intentional or not. What I want to know is what's going to happen to her once she's incarcerated. Because we hear a lot of the sensational stuff that the news glorifies, during the trial. In Kelly's case, it might be person, kills innocent woman. But who's going to follow her immediately into the system, or who's going to be in the system waiting for her when she gets there? And what will happen while she's incarcerated? Is it going to be a lot of the current and ineffective, understaffed and underfunded programming, which we've had for a while? If that's the case, we know to expect recidivism. I mean, the statistics bear that out. Is she going to have the opportunity to really participate in, substance use disorder programming, trauma-informed therapies that are culturally appropriate and female-centric, be a part of things like victim impact panels? We know she'll stand a slightly better chance at not recidivism. So where I immediately went after that is post-release. What is she being released to? We know those of us who have been incarcerated or been put in prison, you usually have to report to some type of PO within 24 hours out of getting out of prison. So what we know is within 24 hours, she's going to have contact with somebody. It's going to be very important. Who is that person? And if it has to be the PO, then we need to think differently about the way that we ask POs to operate, because obviously huge caseloads, understaffed, underpaid. Maybe what we need to think about is a central point where when someone comes out within 24 hours, all of us are there waiting for her so that we can funnel her into appropriate services, whether it be housing that might not have been realized prior to release through someone like Crossroads, or maybe it's like, hey, we need to get this person a primary care doctor so she can have bridge medication in order to get services that she needs, or mental health care. If we're going to make them have contact mandatorily with somebody within 24 hours, we might as well exploit that window of opportunity to get the biggest bang for our buck. The cultural piece is, I can't express from my dealings with my residents at Endorphin Power Company. Everybody's, quite aware, and it's been said that isolation and that feeling and lack of community is a big determining factor in whether or not people achieve success in any type of programming. And so if you feel like you're alone on an island, that creates anxiety and stress, and people facing these challenges, we know what happens when they don't feel supported, don't feel a part of anything meaningful. When they face high levels of anxiety and stress, muscle memory kicks in, and whether it's intentional or not, we kind of travel down that road that we've been traveling. And so we've got to make sure that people feel a part of something. One, so they can feel that sense of esteem and support, and two, because we know it works. Statistically, it's borne out that it works. I had some stuff listed down, but a lot of people have really talked about it. What it comes down to is we've just got to, it's got to be the 24-hour access to services, right? Like if someone decides at 1 o'clock in the morning, hey, I'm done with this life, I just need help right now. And we've got to exploit that window of opportunity. We can't say, well, if you call this number, there might be a chance for you to meet with somebody in 2 weeks. And if they're not the person, then they can connect you with the person, but there might be a 6-week wait to get in there. Like, we need, not now, but right now, to exploit windows of opportunity with people, because quite honestly, it's the individuals that have these moments of clarity. It's very rarely someone like me or other therapists bring them to that point. They come to us saying, hey, I'm here right now. What can you do? And a lot of times we're like, I don't know, I can try and get you in treatment, but unfortunately, these places have their screenings on Tuesday at 9, and they'll call you back by Friday at noon. And hopefully you have enough money to keep your track phone on in a safe place to stay if you don't, so they can reach you. But if not, you're probably going to be moved to the back of the line, and sorry, you're shit out of luck. Right. So we need to exploit windows of opportunity as they happen in the moment, immediately. And that goes for mental health, that goes for violence intervention, that goes for substance use disorder, that goes for homelessness due to all of the things I just mentioned and any other assorted reasons that I might not have mentioned. And so I could go on and on, but it really comes down to me for Kelly. It needs to be female-centric, culturally appropriate, client-centered care that is waiting for her when she gets out, and not scattered site services that are going to put this overwhelming burden on her. We need, Corey mentioned it, like people inherently want accountability and achievable goals, but we don't want it to be the punitive kind where it's just like, you've got to do this and then take the bus there and then bus back across town. Make it achievable, make it attainable, make it available. So with that, I'll shut up. Otherwise the soapbox will get bigger and I won't get off it.
No, thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate it. Victim impact panel, central point of contact for services post-release, 24-hour access to services, client-centered care. I mean, all of those ideas we will be discussing again in our breakout session after we hear from our last panelists. Just want to make sure that I'm recapping as we go along, because we will want to go in and prioritize this stuff. We want to get something done. The time to act is now. So let's get to those measurable goals. I thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing and for giving us your input on what needs to be done in the system to make it better for everyone. And so next, I'd like to welcome our final panelist before we go into our breakout sessions. And I want to encourage all of you to please stay on and join in these breakout sessions. That's where the nitty-gritty work is going to happen. So next up, we have Mary Ellen Garcia from the Crime Victims Reparation Commission. Mary Ellen.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And Jeff, I guess I drew the short stick going last. All the great things have been said. I'm sitting here listening, and I had lots of things that I wanted to say, and I probably still will say them all. But I think as Judge Whitaker, it's nice to see you again, Judge, is collaboration is the key. And I think if we can take one thing out of this, we talk about the need for increased funding. We talk about the need for increased accountability. We talk about the need for really creating true wraparound services that are human-centered, survivor-centered, centered where people are and meeting them where they're at. But at the conclusion of this series, of this exercise that we're doing, we don't want it to be an exercise in futility, that we get to the 6th or 7th session and we've had these great conversations and we've had all of these ideas and then the momentum stops. And I can give a prime example of that. 15 years ago, it was 15 or 18 years ago, and I have some of our law enforcement community on today. We had these exact same conversations when Officer Smith, Officer King, and 3 others were violently murdered in our community by an individual with severe mental health issues. And we had these conversations, and funding was thrown into the community to create 24/7 access to services for families and to kind of talk about a lot of these initiatives. And then the conversation kind of dies off. And so I'm happy to see that we're here to do the work, and that we see folks who are who know what needs to happen, such as Sheena and her colleagues, Veronica and Angel, and all of those who are on. And so I think collaboration is key. As one of the largest victim service funded organizations in the state, we fund over 150 projects across the state, and about $17 to $25 million worth of funding across the state. And I can say that, yes, we're talking about Bernalillo County and the Bernalillo County metro area, but in the last, since January of this year, our office has processed over 160 homicide applications. We've processed 160 homicides in which families have been negatively impacted forever. And the access to resources to those families and those individuals impacted, and the ripple effect on that is immense and greatly traumatic for our communities. And I think I can highlight some of the issues that we're talking about, but I also want to bring up a couple of things. As we're talking about those who are accessing the system, we know that only 40 to 60% of those who are impacted by crime of any kind engage in the system in any way, shape, or form, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's our community-based organizations. So we're looking at only 40% of the population who really is being impacted by crime, who's being impacted in our communities by trauma, are seeking assistance in our communities. So as we're talking about how to talk about prevention services, intervention services, and those reactive services, which are funded through our office, we also need to think about there's an entire population who's not even engaging in the system, who is being impacted by crime and impacted by the communities. And how are we not reaching them, right? Why are we not reaching them? Why are they not engaging in any of the system responses that we have available? So I think that's really important to kind of talk about as we think about throwing funding into this. And I think it's a bigger conversation than just let's throw some money into this, because funding is often available, but it's the ability to create those services. We've been working with the LifeLink, we've been working with First Nations, we've had collaborative relationships with Crossroads over the years. We work with our sexual assault and our Native and our domestic violence coalitions. We work with stakeholders across the state. I know our Sexual Assault Coalition is doing some phenomenal work with Women in Leadership, with Crossroads, with the Violence Intervention Program. And so we have provided funding to ensure that these services are available, but our service providers don't have the resources to be able to hire counselors fast enough. So we have a serious lack in mental health resources needed within the community, and substance abuse resources within the community. And I can tell you that this fiscal year alone, I am probably going to see about $750,000 to $1 million reverted back to my office, which will go back into funding specifically for vacancy savings in counseling services, because our providers don't have individuals who are applying, and they don't have the resources to be able to hire them at adequate salaries. And so when we talk about needing 24/7 wraparound services, we also need to talk about how to create the human capital to do that. We can create the funding, we can advocate for the funding, but if we don't have individuals who are trained and available to provide these services, that are trauma-informed licensed therapists that understand the complexity of trauma and life experience and can help with case management and help folks really kind of think about prevention and intervention services, if they don't have individuals to hire for that, right? I was talking with the LifeLink today. They are turning folks away because they do not have the staff and cannot hire the staff to be able to provide services to our human trafficking victims and our homeless population, right? So we're talking about healthcare for the homeless and all of these organizations. Adequate funding is incredibly important. And yes, we need to increase the funding, but we also need to create a pipeline of within our school system so that individuals want to choose to be to engage in victim and survivor services, in pre-incarceration services, in our social services. If we don't have people who are seeking those careers and being able to participate in that process, then we're still going to be in the same position, right? We're not going to be able to hire mental health professionals in that capacity. I know we've talked about a lot of things, and I think getting into breakout sessions is incredibly important. And I think, what you were talking about with specialty courts, Judge Whitaker, I think, Kyle talking about the need for us to think about, where survivors are and the true impact that we're seeing from Angel and Sheena and the other folks who spoke today on meeting people where they're at and having those, 24 intervention services. We also need to talk about, I think it wasn't brought up, so going last, I think this is one of the populations that we haven't talked about is our youth, right? Kyle, you kind of briefly mentioned it, but I have gotten calls, and we don't have 24/7 services, but 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning, I have received a Saturday call from organizations who are working with a 15-year-old human trafficking survivor, and they have nowhere to put a 15-year-old human trafficking survivor at 2 o'clock in the morning. You can't put a 15-year-old in a hotel, right? Our system is not set up in place. And I see, Kyle, I see you shaking your head. Our system is not set up to be able to assist our homeless youth. Our programs aren't adequately funded and resourced. When I use the word funded, it also means resource, the human capital, the individuals who are trauma-informed, survivor-centered, people-centered, human-centered. We don't have that capacity in our state. Our mental health system is broken. And how do we repair that? We repair that in our schools, right? We repair that by creating a pipeline for those who are, graduating from high school, who want to go to college, who want to volunteer in these organizations to then become licensed mental health therapists or intervention services, and can understand the impact in our communities. So we need to address youth. Just drive down Central. I take my kid every morning to school, and I drive from the East Mountains down Central to take him to school. And I cannot tell you at 7:15 in the morning how many youth I see who are just homeless, and we don't have resources for them in our communities. We don't have shelters to put them in. New Day and other programs aren't adequately resourced. And so I think I would like for us to move away from let's throw funding at it to talking about terminology matters, and let's throw capacity and resources at programs. Let's create human capital. Let's adequately resource our communities to be able to respond to the substance abuse issues, the mental health issues, addressing them, and stop thinking about, and I could talk about this for a long time, and y'all could probably all unmute everyone and we can have this conversation, but stop thinking about prevention, intervention, and our reactive services for survivors, or for those who are engaged in the criminal justice system, those who are going to jail and prison and being incarcerated. Stop thinking about those things in silos. We're just addressing prevention without really thinking about the intervention and then the reactive services. Then we're going to constantly be in this cycle, and we're going to be in the same position that we are, from 15 years ago. We were having these conversations, we were creating dialogue, and we were creating resources. And there are a lot of folks here who, myself included, and those many of whose names and faces I see, we've been doing this work for a long time. And so to have all of these stakeholders, that this momentum needs to not go away to be able to kind of truly address that. So I'm going to take a step back because I could talk about this for a long time. I could go into all the ways in which we can unsilo our resources, and folks who I think who should be here, who are not here, and we need to really be engaging in those conversations. So there we are. I'll take a step back now, Alicia.
I love what you just said about taking away the silos. That's exactly what we're trying to do with this Metro Crime Initiative, is bring all of these key stakeholders together, and let's get some work done together. Let's collaborate towards solutions. You also mentioned pipelines for folks to do this work. We will be addressing pipeline for careers that support the system in its pieces in session 5, our next session. I also really want to acknowledge that there are people on this Zoom who are doing this work day in and day out. Crossroads, Stacy Burleson, all of these folks are doing this work day in and day out. Not to say the work isn't happening, but we have to get in these breakout sessions as well and talk about how we scale it. How do we serve more people? How do we address some of the gaps that still exist, even with some of these key stakeholders at the table? So we're going to get into our breakout sessions now. As I mentioned, you're going to get into very specific measurable goals. I really want to encourage you to have, to be engaged, to have robust conversations, and then we're going to come back into this full group afterward when you're done in your breakout session. I want to give a shout out to our facilitators, Sasha Pellerin, Michaela Renz-Whitmore, Maria Wolf, Myra Siegel, and our scribes, Andrea Calderon, Brian Bonanno, Takashi McConnell, and Haley Kaddish. We could not be doing this session without all of the support it takes from these folks, and there's some great folks who are going to walk you through some dialogue. So with that, let's get into our breakout groups.